Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we are going to talk about a book called The 545 to Cannes. The author's name is Tess Uriza Holthe, and it is a collection of short stories published by Crown Books. And welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Tess is the author of a best-selling novel. Came out before this book. It's called When the Elephants Dance. Mm-hmm. You come up with some strange titles, I think.
It was a saying during the war.
545 to Cannes, as I said, is a collection of short stories. But in one very fundamental sense, it's a very different kind of collection of short stories. In my history, we've interviewed not many short story collection writers, but it's usually like this was laying around and that one was over there, and the editor said, "Why don't you?" And halfway through production, the editor called up and said, "We need one more story," right. And that one got in. But that's not the case here.
No,
that's not the case. Let's talk about how this collection came together. My reader's note for this collection is that these stories are intertwined so artfully, so perfectly. It is as though they could not be told, could not exist without each other.
Thank you.
That's the way I see it. How did this come together?
Well, it started with a vacation with my mother-in-law. She wanted to go to Cannes for about 3 weeks. Uh-huh. And I was supposed to not write, so I left the laptop at home. And I just brought journals thinking maybe someday if I wanted to write about Italy or Europe, I'd have a sense of the place.
21st century woman author without her laptop. Yeah. That's terrible.
So... But what I did is, on the plane, I brought Andrea Barrett's Ship Fever and Hemingway's complete short story collection. Mm-hmm. And so when we landed, I kind of had a short story frame of mind going on without really even considering writing anything. And about the second day there, we were at the Seaside Cafe, and I just saw these people pouring in through the beach, and I kind of had this daydream. I was sitting there, and I thought, this is just so beautiful. Families must come here every year and meet up from all over the world. And I just thought, what if they had this one person in the family, a black sheep, who never quite made it back one year, and what happened to him? And that was kind of the start of that, and I just jotted that down and forgot about it that day.
And then
around the fourth or fifth day, after continually jotting all these images and people I saw and just ideas, I was up with jet lag at around 4 a.m, adding to the ideas. Mm-hmm. And the next thing I know, I knew I had sketched an outline for the first story. And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting, because Andrea Barrett in Ship Fever, she connects a bunch of collections of short stories by a small thin thread of science. And yet the stories all still stood on their own. But there was this one story, maybe 4 stories into the book, that she refers back to a character from the first story, and that kind of just opened a window for me. And I thought, how interesting, because short stories always kind of, you just say goodbye to the characters when the short story ends. And, I always kind of got turned off by that, thinking, well, it's kind of sad, it's painful, you want to hear more about the characters.
Yes,
and
yes.
They end in 30 pages, and so I like that concept.
Was there ever a thought or a discussion between you and somebody at the publishing house, for example, about why don't you make this a novel?
No, they didn't even know I was working on this. I had written the whole thing on the train in 3 weeks in the journals. It was a very Jane Austen experience. It was just kind of feverish writing.
Did you ever talk to your mother-in-law?
No, I did. After playing Scrabble, and we were on a train every day, and after shopping and eating and playing Scrabble and chit-chatting, with that little quiet time right before the train just arrive somewhere.
Is she still talking to you?
Yes.
Yeah. You're still friends?
We're still great friends.
Well, that's good.
She had no idea I was writing the book.
An example of what we're talking about is, in my opinion, the way the first and second stories. The first story is the title story, The 545 to Cannes, mm-hmm. and the second story, The Necklace. How those two mesh together instantly.
Yes.
When you get to the end of the first and the beginning of the second. It's incredible.
Thank you.
It's absolutely incredible. Tied together by the Jewish woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the gypsies, the gypsy boys who have done something terrible.
Exactly.
And she's the only one who sees it.
Yes.
She's the only one who cares. And then it goes on from there.
Right. It's sort of passing the baton, I thought. I was playing with that idea of
Playing with what?
Passing the baton, with one story ending.
Yes.
And all the stories connected by a train ride. And yet, when one story ends, the next person picks up, kind of a passing of the baton, and with that thread of the train and the first incident.
There's another way to look at it. I think that there are characters throughout who are part of a larger story.
Yes. There's a larger story.
The 545 to Khan does raise a number of questions, but there is no question about the quality of the writing. Just stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Tess Uriza Holthe is the author. She is the author of a collection of short stories, a remarkable collection of short stories called The 545 to Khan, published by Crown. And the good folks at Booklist had something nice to say about it, part of which we'll share. Absorbing and graceful, they write, often surprising and sometimes tragic. Uriza Holthe's brilliant collection of stories takes readers on a speeding train ride through the fascinating lives of her nuanced characters. Speaking of the collection being something tragic, another one of my reader's notes was that the book is, in some ways, a collection of tragedies woven around one particular family tragedy.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes, that's pretty accurate, I'd say.
Okay.
All the tragedies seem to resound from that first incident. And yet I didn't think that, as I was writing it, that was the only tragedy I realized I was writing in the beginning. And when I stepped back when the book was done, I realized each story kind of had a melancholy feel to
Yeah, that's true. One after the other, you come across some rather serious stuff. But there's also a couple of what you might almost call turns in here.
Yes.
That are not tragic at all, which are rather funny. The arrangement between Alberto and his three widows slash wives, Neto, Clara, and Anna Margarita.
Yes.
Tell us about the how he pulled this off, and then I'll read from here.
Well, Signor Alberto Moretti was a fashion designer in his day, and he married one woman because of her talents, and of course he loved her too. But then when he was done with her, he didn't divorce her. He just went ahead and married someone else. As
you say in here, and this is a marvelous, non-tragic part of the book, Albert Moretti married each of his wives for their designs and sewing abilities. Mm-hmm. Yet each was lovely in her own way, and so it could not be said that he had poor taste. He was a man of impeccable taste. Each of his wives was 10 years older than the previous one, and each Alberto had married directly after dispensing with the last. Now, he didn't kill him. Now, don't get the wrong impression out there. But to Alberto, dispensing simply meant moving the woman to the next room. He was vehemently against divorce, and so when he wished to remarry another woman, he simply did so without informing the church that he was already married. Instead of divorcing the previous wife, he cared for her like a favorite heirloom.
Yes.
What a guy. Where did he come from? I hope you don't have an Uncle Albert who's like that.
I think that may have come from being brought up Catholic and hearing, there's no such thing as divorce. Divorce is horrible. And, so that was always on the back of my mind as I was writing about him. But really, those three women are what attracted me, when I was in Cannes. Our next stop was Italy, Rapallo, and there was this hotel. And I only saw these three women briefly in town, but they were holding... I didn't realize that they were local residents, and that they were holding the one of the hotels hostage in terms of the hotel manager loved these women, and there was only one internet line, and I think you would unplug that and have the TV on. And so some of the guests would want to check their email, and we were one of them, but it wasn't so, important. And he would say, "Oh, no, those three women, they're guests here. They're very important guests here." But they didn't even stay at the hotel, and he just loved to let them watch their variety shows. And I thought that was just such a kick, and I remember just jotting that idea down.
With your internet,
yeah.
Kid, you're in Italy now.
Yeah.
Now, this little passage about my friend Alberto concludes, once he finished with a woman, he stayed true to the next. Mm-hmm. It could never be said that Alberto was a two-timer. He never slept with the previous wife once he was done with her, despite any sly plans she might have had for getting into his bed at night.
Yeah.
When he was done with one, he was done. My kind of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
I don't know where that came from.
Oh, dear. One of the other points where I was really almost overcome by what I felt was the aptness or the beauty of the writing has to do with the character Sophie Olafsson. Olafsson, is that right? Yeah.
Olafsson, yeah.
Yeah, who's a photographer who lives in San Francisco, and at one time photographed one of the characters in the story.
Yes.
And she is left without parents by an accident. Shooting stars heralded their return to an empty house. She turned to Blue, and on the way home, his mouth opened. Blue's a dog. Blue smelled so sweet from sleeping on her mother's flower bed. She lifted his paw and inhaled the musty earth. "Where have you been?" she asked as his pink tongue swept over her forehead. Memories of the beach and their last summer together lingered in his paws. I love that phrase, lingered in his paws.
Thank you. I often do that to my own dog, smell his paws.
There's great writing in the 545 The Can. It's full of stories that you'll love and fascinating characters. We'll meet a few of them when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. The 545 Con is the title of the book. Tess Uriza Holthe has been spending this program with us, and one of the people that loved the book well in advance was Library Journal, and they said in part, Holthe has a gift for characterization and detail, and her descriptions of the French countryside are superb. Enthusiastically recommended. I'll add an enthusiastically recommended to Library Journals myself. And, the characterization is what I really want to talk about, though, in this segment. And I was wondering, is it something you have to do rather quickly when you're writing short stories vis-a-vis writing a novel?
Creating a character, you mean?
Yeah, getting something down, some kind of description fast, because you're not going to have 12 pages to do this.
Oh, right, yes.
In that sense, yeah.
I don't really break it down that way. I just immediately have an image of the character already in my mind, and whatever I see them doing, I just kind of pull that out, and I guess it comes into the writing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not a conscious thing. I just know what they look like and what they would be like, if that makes sense. Yeah.
One of the important characters, in my opinion, is the Jewish woman, whose name is Annie Barr. Mm-hmm. She's a Jewish mom. She sees all, doesn't remember too well at the moment because of her age, but hasn't talked to her son in several months because he married a Catholic.
Yes.
Where does she come from?
My mother-in-law's Jewish.
Oh, this poor mother-in-law. You didn't talk to her on the whole trip?
No.
Now she's in the book. She's seen up.
But that's where the background came from. It's about Annie having that patisserie in that the stores. My mother-in-law's family owned stores, a delicatessen kind of thing like that. But that's where the Jewish idea came from. The part about the son marrying a Catholic woman was kind of a conversation we picked up while we were on the train. We could hear this one woman back there adamantly talking about how her son had not
done the right thing.
Done the right thing, right.
Married a Catholic. My goodness gracious. Now, there's a character. I mean, people in this collection come from all over. Mm-hmm. There's a guy from Scotland.
Yes.
And his name is Colin the Bruiser Ferguson.
Yes.
What's he all about?
Well, he's in search of this guy who owes the man a debt, and so Colin set out to collect the debt and find this guy, hunt him down.
And one of the things you achieve when he's on the scene is you have him talk in dialect.
Yes, Glaswegian.
Which really surprised me.
Great.
I thought you did a very good job.
Thank you. A long time ago, I worked for a woman who was Scottish, and also my husband's cousin Heidi married a Glaswegian. So
This is a real family book, folks.
yeah, I guess
Really?
so I can hear the way it should sound.
Giancarlo Villoresi.
Yes.
Described in the press release for the book as a pickpocket considering a career change.
Yes.
Tell us about him.
Giancarlo's the youngest of 3 pickpockets, but he's the main guy, and he scouts out their targets. But he has other aspirations. He would love to go to Spain and learn to become a bullfighter. Only when he gets to Spain, he starts to feel more for the bulls than the bullfighter.
Yeah, that was an interesting development. You know, he went off with 3 American
Yes.
kids.
Yeah, he just wants to be a kid himself. But
He's going to be a bullfighter, but then he goes to see a bullfight, and he's on the bull side.
right.
Yeah, all right. Now, there are 2, I don't know whether you can say main characters, but the 2 characters who, if you will, bookend all the stories, Chaz and Claudette Jorgensen.
Yes.
And they live in San Francisco in a very lovely house.
Victorian.
And they have money from faucets, which amused me. But there they are. Tell us about that marriage.
Well, the husband is an American, and he met Claudette in France, in Cannes, and she was waitressing. And so he's the heir of this huge fortune. And his father didn't approve of the match. But there's more problems than that. He suffers from bipolarity, and so their marriage suffers from that.
That's the big tragedy, I think.
I think so.
Is his sickness and the overpowering nature of the sickness in his situation, which makes the whole thing fall apart.
Yes. And her story, that whole book I wrote in 3 weeks, but her story came about 6 months later, and so it actually bookended. I didn't even intend to have it bookend that way, and it came full circle.
It won't take you 6 months to read this, but I advise you not to start it unless you're ready to go through the whole thing. It's that fascinating.
Thank you.
It's the 545 to Cannes. The author, Tess Uriza Holthe. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.